Welcome back, everyone. We are back now for our final session of the day with Ryan McEnany of Bailey Nurseries. A native of Woodbury, Minnesota, Ryan has a diverse background within the communications, entertainment, beauty, and horticulture industries. While working towards a degree in communication studies from the University of St. Thomas, Ryan began his career working at Big Brothers Big Sisters of the Greater Twin Cities before transitioning to internships in Los Angeles. Following graduation, he moved permanently to continue his work in entertainment public relations, representing clients such as Tom Ford, Jude Law, Annette Bening, Ridley Scott, Ryan Murphy, Matthew Broderick, and the USA Network. During this time, he worked on international campaigns for Glee, Sherlock Holmes, Sex and the City, Robin Hood, and more. Following his work as a celebrity publicist, Ryan transitioned into the fashion and beauty segment of the entertainment industry. In that role, he oversaw public relations and brand relationships for top celebrity hairstylists, makeup artists, and more. Upon returning to Minnesota, Ryan's public relations clients have included Twin Cities Pride, the Minnesota Ironman Bicycle Ride, the Minnesota AIDS Walk, Minnesota Corral, and more. Ryan is a fifth-generation family member at Bailey Nurseries, a 113-year-old business headquartered outside of St. Paul, Minnesota. The company has grown to be one of the largest growers of trees and shrubs in the United States and also owns some of the largest consumer brands in the home and garden industry: Endless Summer Hydrangeas, First Editions Plants, and Easy Elegance Roses. Ryan currently handles public relations and social media for the brands and has recently been named their national consumer spokesperson. Ryan will be presenting today on how to communicate with the millennial generation and will share research and data on millennials' relationship with the home and garden industry. Please welcome Ryan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. As Katie said, my name is Ryan McEnany, and I work for Bailey Nurseries in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I'm really excited to share with you today some information and insight a little bit into the millennial generation, which is also known as the me generation, and trying to get an understanding from a millennial perspective. So to kick us off, we have to take a look, before we get too far into it, into who the millennials are. Who is a millennial? This, I think, is a pretty good stereotypical picture of the millennials. You've got cell phones, you've got the fancy coffee, the iPad, lots of color and a bright space. So I think that it's a pretty good representation, and honestly kind of looks like what me and my friends would do if we're not paying attention. We sort of get distracted and pulled into our phones, and it's become a little bit of a reality of who we are. I think that we're trying to take a little bit of a step back, because there is this is the idea. Literally, I typed in millennials, and this is one of the first pictures that showed up on Google. So I think that's something we have to battle a little bit, but also for all of us in the marketing field to sort of take into account as we prepare all of our strategies. We're also the selfie generation, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a little bit. But you look through a millennial's newsfeed, you look at their Facebook profile, you look at Instagram, you look at the Instagram stories especially, and the selfie is incredibly prevalent. You look at, they've created selfie sticks for this exact reason. And so I think that this sort of, again, leads to who the millennials are perceived as, this sort of selfie-obsessed generation. On top of that, and in addition to it, we've got the celebrity piece on top, and the celebrity selfie, and Kim Kardashian, who sort of started this whole thing herself. She's probably single-handedly responsible for a lot of the ideas of what millennials are, and it's because she has been, whether you like her or not, she and her mother have been brilliant in creating an empire. I'm also a millennial, as you probably can tell from the beginning of the talk and from sort of how we've constructed this. This is a picture of me this last summer I was at an event in New York. We partnered with HGTV for a consumer-facing blogger event. I am, as Katie mentioned, a fifth-generation family member and did not come to this through the horticulture route. I did work at Bailey growing up. I worked in production in the fields, and then moved from there to marketing to work on our more trade-focused customer events at Bailey before moving to LA and working there for quite some time. I have been back at Bailey's for 5 years now and work really on the consumer-facing side of it. I do trade communications as well, but a big chunk of my job is connecting with consumers. And it's everyone from a master gardener all the way through people that don't consider themselves gardeners at all, but maybe buy a plant once a year, and being able to finding ways to engage them, get them excited, and get them more and more invested in what we are doing in the green industry. As you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, I'm on sort of all of the major social networks, both personally and professionally, from Facebook and Instagram, all the way down through Snapchat. And the bottom one on there, if you don't know it, is Grow It. So if you don't know it, I highly suggest you check them out. There's just a story in the Wall Street Journal last week, on the founders, Steph and Mason. They're a Chicago-based app that has connected hundreds of thousands of people that are interested in plants. It's super easy to use. It's a great way for people to get connected. And obviously, since it's app and it's founded by a couple 30-something-year-old guys, the focus generally trends to be a little bit younger. And they're great for public gardens as well. They have a program specific to working with public gardens. I know many of you may have apps yourself already, but this is also a really, really great tool. So again, if you don't know them or you don't have it yourself, it's definitely worth having either yourself or someone in your department research Grow It. So taking one step even further back, to look at a little bit of data, I think this is where we have to start to really get the concept of who millennials are. And the age thing is a little bit gray, and I know people on both ends of the spectrum don't really feel like they fit in the millennial generation, but generally we say from early 80s to early to mid 2000s, that's what makes up the millennial generation. We're about a third of the US population overall, around 80 million. So we're the largest age group in the US still today. We're also considered to be the most diverse and most educated generation in the history of the United States. An interesting fact that I look at, since 1980, the white non-Hispanic group has gone from 78 to 58% in 15 to 34-year-olds. So for those of us in the millennial generation, the white non-Hispanic group has dropped by 20% since 1980. So I think that as we're crafting messaging, as we're looking at programming, as we're looking at finding funds to support all that we do, it's really important to have that mindset going into it. And we're also sort of a trend that we'll see throughout this, incredibly influenced by technology. We are also called the connected generation. We are, my personal example, I'm 32, so I graduated high school in 2004, and when I went to college my freshman year, I went to school in St. Louis, and that's right when Facebook started to take off. And at that time, you had to have a university email to even be on Facebook. And so I grew up sort of without it. I didn't play video games growing up. Coming from a hort industry family, I wasn't allowed to have video games. We spent a lot of time outdoors, but as soon as I got my driver's license, my junior year in high school, I got a cell phone. And so much of my life, I have had some sort of connection. And then it's really, really obviously developed since then. And it's because of those rapid and drastic advances in technology that has really started to make the millennial generation unique in how we engage, how we interact, and how we share, and how we spend our money. From there, we have to talk about the economic impact before we really get into how we engage, because millennials have money to spend and are spending in a very different way. And money talks. And so being able to understand sort of the economic piece of it first, I think has a lot of impact on how we in our industry engage with millennials. If you don't know John Gersma, he's a great marketing author and researcher. He's got a book called Spend Shift that I highly recommend. Some of this comes from John, some comes from Forbes, as you see on here. But the millennial generation as a whole, us 80 million strong, have an over $1 trillion. We account for over $1 trillion in U.S. consumer spending. That's incredible. We're all chasing the dollar, especially on the nonprofit side of it. We all are looking for how we can gain that dollar, and there's a great economic impact with the millennial generation. But as I mentioned, we're spending differently too. It's not buying the McMansions. It's not worrying necessarily about the best new car, other than maybe a Tesla. I know a lot of millennials that are aching for a Tesla, but we're spending differently. And so one step even further back, thinking about when millennials came into adulthood is an important piece of this. And I think that this is going to continue to trend throughout the rest of our conversation today is sort of taking a step back and understanding millennials in a different context. We came into adulthood during the Great Recession. And I don't know if we all call it the Great Recession, but I do. And the way that we talk about it within our family, because there are still 11 of us family members involved, including third generation family members, my grandpa and his brother, Gordon Bailey Jr. and Rod Bailey, who are in their early 80s, that have been with this company for over 60 years. They call it the Great Recession as well, because especially in our industry, it had such dire impact on how we operate and who still exists in our industry. So that's when we came into adulthood. I graduated college in 2007, so I graduated a little early, but most of my friends graduated in 2007, 2008, and we are saddled with debt, and we came into a recession where there was very few jobs. So there were employment issues, huge debt, and so it's really shaped how we spend our money. Frugal spending, we've been considered spending similar to the silent generation, which would be those that came out of the Great Depression. And I think that we can sort of take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, because we will talk about how we spend, and with that $1 trillion of spending power, there's still money being spent. But I think that it's just different spending, especially because when we're looking at how much we are making, again, coming into the recession, not finding jobs or finding jobs that don't pay a huge salary is something that we faced. So for the first time in America, there's now more student loan debt than credit card debt, and borrowers today are responsible for paying back double the amounts required of borrowers 20 years ago. So we're coming in where there's limited jobs or jobs with lesser salaries, and that still follows through today. So for those of us that got jobs in that time, we're still feeling that, yet we're saddled with an incredible amount of debt. But I think what's really exciting about this, even though that's sort of a not great statement, is that we're not as focused on money being the foundation for success. From John's book, Spend Shift, that I mentioned earlier, he did a bunch of research and found that almost 88% of millennials disagreed with the statement that money is the best measure of success. And that's compared to 78% of the total population. So almost 10% more said that money isn't how we measure our success. And I think what's even more exciting for our industry is that 64%, so over half of millennials, would rather make $40,000 a year at a job they love than $100,000 a year at a job they think is boring. So I know that we also worry about millennials job jumping and all of that, and that is, of course, a reality. But I think that we have great opportunity to showcase what our industry offers to be able to start recruiting. So not necessarily in getting people to come visit your gardens, but also looking at this from a recruiting perspective too, because we do have so much inherent excitement about green and nature in the millennial generation, and going back to nature and taking their kids to the gardens and being able to grow your own fruits and vegetables with your family. All of that is a great gateway into showcasing what our industry offers, the diversity in jobs that we offer, and getting them really excited about coming in, because I know that we don't all have gigantic budgets to spend on payroll. With that, there's another organization that you may know about, and if you don't, that I would strongly recommend that you look at. And Paul Redmond at Longwood is one of the leaders in this, which is Seed Your Future. My mother, who is the president of Bailey, along with Paul and Anna Ball and a few others, have sort of gotten this group off the ground that really focuses on recruiting the next generation and nurturing the next generation into our industry. And so if that's not something that you're a part of, I recommend checking it out. There's also Bloom, which is part of Seed Your Future, that I'm really excited I get to participate in with their social committee that really focuses on the middle school age kids and getting them excited, not just about our industry, but just about plants and being really creative. And so starting them young is really, really exciting. The last piece that I want to talk about on this page before we get into the me piece of it is looking at the chart of average use of monthly income. So again, we talk about how we're making less money, saddled in debt, and came into this in a really difficult time. But notice that a piece of the pie, it's not the biggest, it's probably the smallest, but there's a donation section on there. And if you look at, again, we talk about how people are spending money differently, you would think that if there's less money, that donations wouldn't necessarily fit onto that pie chart. But because we are so invested generally in our generation on relationship and experience, which again, we're going to get into definitely more in depth, that it is an important piece of who we are in social justice and social responsibility. So in the public garden sector, being able to harness the excitement of a millennial generation also can drop down to your bottom line. So that's something that I think is really exciting, that it's even a part of this conversation. So this is where it all began. This is from May of 2013. So it's an older story from Time magazine that Joel Stein wrote. But this is when the conversation about millennials and being able to have a conversation with millennials and marketing to millennials really, really kicked off. And I think that sort of similar to the first picture I showed you, that this is very representative of what millennials are characterized as because of how we act. So it's not far off. But I love the copy that he has written. Millennials are lazy, entitled narcissists who still live with their parents, and why they'll save us all. But I want to start by focusing on the first piece of it. Lazy, entitled narcissists who live with their parents. We can't have this conversation. We've already talked about Kim, so we've got to talk about Kanye too. This is from his interview in The Guardian in 2005. So again, it's a little bit old, but for those of you that know Kanye, not much has changed. And he says, come on now, how could you be me and want to be someone else? And Kanye is sort of the epitome of narcissism. And as we look at the me generation, narcissism obviously is something that is a stigma that we fight, but there's also science to prove it. The narcissistic personality disorder is 3 times as high for people in their 20s and early 30s, so those of us in the millennial generation, as for the generation that's now 65 and older. So 3 times as high that narcissism personality disorder is showing up in the millennial generation. 58% more college students scored higher on a narcissism scale in 2009 than 1982. So these are real big numbers showing that this is a reality that we are facing. And so part of our role in the marketing piece of it is how do we cater to that without exploiting it, I think we can say. The participation trophy. Who on this call has either talked about this, joked about it, or heard someone say everyone needs a trophy? And I know I've heard it. I know that I've thought it sometimes. I also outside of Bailey own a couple of businesses, and almost all of my employees are creative 20-somethings, and I catch myself feeling this way a little bit. But I love the subheader they have on there, creating entitlement-minded whiners since the 1980s, because everyone needs a trophy. They also have 99% fool's gold on there. I think it's kind of funny. And sort of a stat that goes along with this as it relates to us in a professional field is that 40% of millennials believe that they should be promoted every 2 years, regardless of performance. So we need a trophy. We need to get that pat on the back, and we need to get promoted. Doesn't matter what we do, right? It's not just about us, but I've talked a little bit about this throughout the day. The celebrities. It's all about the celebs and holding their umbrellas and holding up their dresses. 3 times as many middle school girls right now want to grow up to be a personal assistant to a celebrity than wants to be a senator. That to me is pretty darn scary. 4 times as many would have picked this assistant job where they're holding up the skirt and they're holding up the umbrella than being the CEO of a major corporation. These are all really scary things that we have to face. So you're probably wondering why I've spent the last 20 minutes sort of talking poorly about my compatriots in the millennial generation. They're all realities that we have to face, but I think we need to go and take one step back and see, where did we come from? Why are millennials this way? Because again, if we can understand the why, we can understand how better to communicate and engage with them, and ultimately drive people to our gardens, to drive business, to drive donations. Millennials as a whole are children of baby boomers who, I didn't know this until, again, I was doing some research for this conversation that we had, that we started a couple of years ago. But the New York Magazine did this great story called The Me Decade. And this is from the mid-70s. So the me generation was really born out of the me generation. Then technology came on board and exacerbated all of these things that were sort of bred into us without even really understanding it. So you look at the Yuppie Handbook, which I think is hilarious, but you think about how entertainment and how all of that has sort of shaped who we are. You look at the McMansions of the 90s and early 2000s. You look even further back at the Cleavers and the perfection that was sort of placed on the ideal American society. Then you take all of that and you add technology, and it just blows it up. There's an interesting stat that today the average middle-class American family walks around 85 pictures of themselves and their pets. 85 pictures that they are staring at every day of themselves and their families. So we grew up around this. As a millennial, we grew up, and I did it too. I remember there were pictures all over the place of our family. We had the nice house, we had the yard, we had like these things were a relevant piece of how we grew up without even knowing it. And then we got technology, and so that expectation of perfection, we had the accessibility to communicate that, and almost the expectation to communicate that on a regular basis. I also love this photo because it reminds me a little bit of growing up as well. And for those of you that are in the boomer generation, think about when you would share vacation photos or family photos. I remember when we had family before the internet existed, we had family that were traveling overseas or visiting family elsewhere, and we would all go to their house and watch slideshows after. This is really no different than what millennials are doing by being self-obsessed on our phones. It's just that we have the technology. I think that this is really funny. There's a quote that says, "Can you imagine if the boomers had YouTube? How narcissistic would it have seemed to their parents?" And so it's just the construct and how we communicate that has changed. And it's not only changed how we communicate, but the frequency. There's another quote that I love. "Can you imagine how many freaking Instagrams of people playing in the mud during Woodstock would we have seen? I think in many ways you're blaming millennials for the technology that happens to exist right now." So as we have this conversation and as we look at moving forward and how we communicate with millennials and how we engage with millennials in the workplace, in our businesses, with our customers, and just moving forward as we're looking at recruiting and all of those things. Shift your mindset a little bit and realize that if these things this technology would have existed earlier, this sort of thing would have happened to someone else, but the millennials grew up with it and grew up with this immense hockey stick of change that has totally transformed how we operate. Another way that I like to look at this, my sister is a teacher, and I've got a lot of friends that are teachers as well, and there's always the conversation, even from a millennial, about how often students are in class on their phones. And again, sort of taking that shifted perspective a little bit, imagine that you are in line at the grocery store, or I was in Disney World last week for National Garden Bureau meeting, and the line for the Pirates of the Caribbean ride was an hour long. And again, I try to intentionally not have my phone out as often as I would probably without thinking about it. And so I said, all right, I'm going to make it through this line. I'm going to talk to everyone that I'm with, and I'm going to communicate with the people that are around me. 10 minutes in, I had my darn phone out. Now imagine that you're in 8th grade. You've had technology your entire life. And how could you make it through without it? And I'm not saying that this is right at all. I just think that we need to take a step back and realize that we're sort of a product of our surroundings, and this is what's happened. And so with all of this, I think that for all of us to be able to move forward in this, we have to just take a little bit different perspective. So technology has created this narcissism. Technology has created laziness or perceived laziness. You look at some of the stats on how millennials spend their time, and number one is TV. And we all know that now TV doesn't mean sitting in front of the TV set in your living room. It means on your phone watching Netflix. It means on your laptop. It means all YouTube. It means all of these things, but that's the number one thing. So there's some real and perceived laziness that technology has created the opportunity for. But I also think that allows millennials to be idealistic, connected to people that they never would have been connected to before, have an entrepreneurial spirit, and see what things they can create, and also challenge convention, because things that have always been done the way they've always been done, because we didn't have necessarily a broader perspective. And so we're not just selfish and entitled. We're curious, we're optimistic, we crave experience. And so these are the things that I think for us as marketers and for us in the green industry that we have to be really excited about. And we have to, again, not necessarily in an opportunistic way, but we have to capitalize on this. We have people that want to do more, that want to do better for the earth, for themselves, for their families, and for their neighbors. So where do we go from here? This I love too. This is from the Wall Street Journal. It was just after the Great Recession, so still during more difficult times, but I just love that it starts with millennials are seeking happiness. And what does happiness mean? It means obviously different things to different people, but even during these hard times, so the hard times of the Great Recession, millennials were still optimistic, and it felt 9 out of 10 millennials felt that they still would expect to reach their goals by the time of retirement. The secret is in adjusting the goals. So it's not necessarily the McMansion. It's not necessarily the Lexus, maybe the Tesla, but not necessarily. It's about changing what we really, really want in life. And for us in the industry, how do we help fulfill that? So my friends, myself included, I would rather go on a trip and experience a new place. I'm going to Europe in June for a concert and staying for an extra week. And my goal in that extra week is to visit places that I have never been before that aren't capital cities. I would rather do that than buy myself a new refrigerator. I would rather do all of these things and being able to go out and try new restaurants and meet new people and engage with different communities, different cultures within our community, even here in the Twin Cities. I would rather do that than buy a bigger house and spend my money there. And so our goals are just different. And again, we have to take that into account when we're planning our programming, planning our communications, and figuring out how we're going to fund ourselves for the future. So where do we fit? We fit by providing accessible beauty. We are an industry of so many things, but we are an industry of beauty. And this is what Instagram is all about. So there's no organization, there is no industry better poised to take advantage of this really exciting time than we are. On the left-hand side, you'll see a dress that I came up with the idea, but I definitely did not put together. That is not my creativity. But this was for a media event that we hosted, and many of the media that were here at Bailey were long lead publications. So I knew I wasn't going to get anything out of it right away, which wasn't necessarily the goal, but I wanted to create a moment that people would be able to capture and remember. And so we created this beautiful gown. It was all out of living material, obviously featuring hydrangeas, which is our #1 selling plant, but it gave a moment that was really spectacular. And this is, again, these ideas, hopefully you can be able to take and recreate in your space, but it was a moment that was really exciting and got a lot of great traction. On the right-hand side was at the Chicago Flower Show a couple of years ago. They literally created like Mona Lisa frames surrounded by flowers. And I was at that show every single day because we had an area that we had to staff, and I was speaking there, and that photo booth was full every single time. So we do this, we create this accessible beauty, but we also have to create the content to support it. We have to get people there to actually see it, and then create signage while they're there to get people pushed the right direction, focusing, maybe you have an area that's focused on DIY. How do they do this on their own? Not necessarily this, but maybe you have container combinations and some educational components that you build into your displays. Forbes says that millennials are 60% more likely to produce and share content online than anyone that's not a millennial. So brands, or any of us, we are all our own brand, we have to undergo a vast transformation to attract and retain millennials. If we don't provide ease of access at a reasonable cost, and millennials aren't passionate about it, Forbes says, we ain't buying it, period. So as we work on developing all of these things, we have to realize that, but we also have to remember that we have a really exciting product to sell. We also have the opportunity to capitalize on this movement of homegrown or locally grown or locally sourced, because that is very, very prevalent. The National Garden Association said that millennial gardeners have increased from 8 million in 2008 to 13 million in 2013, and that continues to rise. So that's a 63% increase in 5 years of millennials that call themselves gardeners. A lot of this stems from food, and I know a lot of public gardens have a great food program. Use that to draw them in. We have to capitalize on this, and then again, once they're in, we get them hooked and get them excited and give people reasons to engage. Some of it might just be the aesthetic. Some of my friends, like I told you about, they buy one plant a year, but give them a reason to use you as a resource and talk about how it's helping the community, how it's helping them. Do you do dedications? Do you do community engagement with volunteer opportunities? All of those things are important. So if you are doing those, showcase them on social to attract that new audience. Another piece that's really trendy is the idea of wellness and even gardening for wellness. But for those that, again, don't consider themselves gardeners, provide opportunities for them to experience wellness in your space. This is at the Greater Des Moines Botanic Garden. Many of you, I'm sure, know Kelly Norris, and he sent me this and told me that their highest population group that visits their garden is millennials. And it's because they create things like this. They do a live concert series right on the river. They're, of course, a big wedding venue, but they create programming that is relevant to an audience that they know they need for the future. So it's really exciting. It's really cool to see that it's happening. And I know many of you are probably doing this as well, but just keep continuing and keep pushing the envelope. Getting back very briefly to the financial piece of it, this to me was really exciting. I mean, it shows that millennials are spending money more freely than probably anyone else. So again, we talk about frugality, but we also talk about this. But again, it's just a shift that this is now more our priority than, again, saving up to buy a big brand new house. We're a more renter-focused group or a more modest home purchasing group. The two pieces of this that I'd like to focus on are the bottom two. Eating at a hot restaurant in town, 79% of millennials said that that is a priority. And going to see live music, sports, or another event, 73% said that they're willing to spend more freely there than any other generation. This sort of goes back to the Des Moines Botanic Garden as an example, doing yoga, having a concert series. People are willing, millennials are willing to spend money on it. And so they're telling us that this is what they will do. So we have to internalize that and say, okay, let's bring that in. And I know that sometimes weddings and yoga, like you see on the lawn, there are horticultural challenges that brings. But if we want to draw in, retain, attract, and keep these people for future donors and for the future health of our organization, we can't fight it, and we have to take what exists already. The other piece of it that I think is really important is to reach millennials where they are already. We can't continue traditional methods of communication for this audience. I'm not saying don't do that at all, because I'm sure a majority of your audience still receives traditional media through e-newsletters, through print, through billboards. Those things are still important for that audience, but you have to shift your messaging a little bit for this group. So not only your messaging, but how you communicate with them. This is probably very true of myself. 18 to 33-year-olds each send out almost 4,000 text messages each month. So if people are attached to their phones, which we all are, why are we not spending more of our time, energy, and resources reaching them on their phone? We have a text program for all three of our consumer brands because we knew that this is the reality of our world. And so we call them mobile care programs. So people enter their zip code and they get timely reminders based on where they are in the country for how to take care and have the best success with their plants. Because from our perspective as a wholesale grower and a consumer product owner, that if they don't have success with their one hydrangea, they're not going to buy their second, third, and fifth hydrangea. And so this is a way for us to communicate directly without having to make them go elsewhere to find that information. Video is another huge piece, and obviously social media. So we have to reach people where they are. One of the other final things that I want to talk about today that I think that there's great opportunity both for the development of relationships with American Public Gardens Association and with all of your organizations and connecting with millennials is finding partnerships with brands like Endless Summer. There are a number of us that are large brands that are aching to have this connection the same that you are. We're all fighting that same fight, and we should do it together. We all have budgets to do this. We have creative ideas. And for people like me that sit behind a desk in St. Paul, Minnesota, it's really hard to connect with the millennial that lives in Texas, that lives in New York, that lives in Oregon without having a presence. And so working with public gardens is a focus of my role at Bailey, and one that I've been really excited about since I've been on board. This is an example of an event that we did for Mother's Day last year at Longwood. They were very gracious enough to allow us to come in and work with them for the entire weekend. We built this step and repeat wall out of hydrangeas for Mother's Day weekend. We brought a photographer in and we took pictures of families as they walked through. It wasn't branded Endless Summer, none of that. It was, again, just to create an experience. And so there are multiple generations. There's millennials with their kids. But again, this caters exactly to what millennials want. They want that Instagrammable moment. And so this is something that Longwood saw great opportunity in. Not that they don't have millions of other Instagrammable moments as well, but this was something special and unique for that weekend, so that they could share this with their guests, because they were able to take these pictures free of charge and keep as a memento. So opportunities like this are really exciting. We also did something similar, but in a different context, For those of you that listened to Joe's talk earlier, this is at the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago. They did an event, Craft Brews at the Zoo. And so that, by the way, is a brilliant idea. They had a big beer festival, and we were out doing a tour. And so I reached out to Joe, and they, again, were very gracious to have us there. And we built, again, a wall out of hydrangeas. And this was all for millennials. And let me tell you, we didn't think that people really knew. We knew that people like appreciated plants and all that, but I can't tell you how many guys coming through my age that said, oh, I love hydrangeas, or I've got hydrangeas in my house, or hydrangeas were in my wife's wedding bouquet. They know it. And finding them again in a place where they are already existing, where they are already having fun, was a really exciting way for us to interact. Not to mention, they all had a lot of fun because there was beer, but I also loved this picture, and we did not set this up. This was an absolutely natural setting, and it could not be more perfect for this conversation. Creating Instagrammable moments. Lincoln Park Zoo branding is right there. It wasn't necessarily about the hydrangeas, but it was creating an experience that they wanted to remember. So that was really, really exciting, and an opportunity for working with brands like Endless Summer that we can help you create these moments. Another example of what we did just recently, again, I mentioned we do a tour every year where we go out and work in the community, work with public gardens and work with nonprofits, do media, we do retail garden center visits. This was from our East Coast tour last year. This is at Magnolia Plantation in South Carolina, just outside Charleston. And they were kicking off a 30-acre kids garden. And so we were very excited to partner with them, and we donated a bunch of plants for the groundbreaking of the kids garden. And this was exciting for us for many reasons. One, because it was giving back to the public gardens that do so much for our community. It also, sort of a mutually beneficial thing, is that there are varieties that are currently available on the marketplace shown in a public garden setting that is incredibly important, because we're a generation that relies on inspiration. And though we love our independent garden centers, they are a sales tool, and the opportunity for inspiration comes with public gardens. And so for us to be able to showcase these plants that people can see how great they work in the landscape, go to their garden center or go online if that's where they shop and say, that's what I want because I saw that it worked and I saw that it was beautiful. So that was really exciting. It also, especially because this was a kids-focused garden, it reaches that young audience that we desperately are all going after. It's millennials that are in there taking their selfies. It's millennials with kids, and we're grooming Gen Z who's coming up after us, fierce and strong, and it's getting them engaged with our plants from a brand perspective, but getting them just engaged and excited with nature. I mentioned the Des Moines Botanic Garden a couple of times. This is what we do when we're on tour. So if we're coming into your area, I will for sure be in touch with you. We're doing Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois this year. So if you're there, either reach out to me or I will reach out to you, and we can work on a partnership. But we drive this big Endless Summer wrapped van around, and we create these events. So Lincoln Park Zoo is obviously in collaboration with the zoo and the craft beer, but Longwood, we came in and we will help create these moments for you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We also, the final piece of this, where we talk about partnerships, we also are great resources for potential funding of projects. This is an example on the left-hand side on Cape Cod. This is Heritage Museums and Gardens. And along with Dr. Michael Durr, Endless Summer and Bailey Nurseries have helped to sponsor a new garden, a new hydrangea test garden. So this is what has now been dubbed the International Hydrangea Test Garden, and it's located again in Sandwich, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. And they have this really incredible historical collection of hydrangeas. And again, going back to having the conversation with millennials, it's important that they're able to see something that then they can go purchase. So we, along with Dr. Durr and a couple other partners, funded the growth. So there's a whole acre that's being developed. This was just year one of hydrangeas that are currently available on the market. And Mal Condon, who some of you may know, Mal's doing a lot of the research. So they're providing us feedback as well on the performance of the hydrangeas. But the people that are there, that are visiting, get to experience these new, really beautiful, great plants that they wouldn't experience elsewhere. We had our photographer out there who is shooting this photo on the left, and she just was sort of walking through quietly one day, and there was a young mom there with her daughter, and all she wanted, the little young girl, all she wanted to do was get her picture taken with the hydrangeas. So again, it's creating an experience, but from a business perspective, there's opportunities for partnership where it's not just free plants that are going into your landscape, which I love to provide because we love to see them there, but there's also opportunity for financial partnerships as well. This one that we had with Heritage ended up also getting some great PR benefits. So while BHG might not be the perfect target for a millennial audience, it also had this ancillary benefit of getting some really great coverage. They came out that year. They knew that we were building this garden, and so they came out. Jane came and their photographer flew up and did an entire 6-page spread on hydrangeas and gave Heritage a lot of great publicity. And then we got the cover as well. So it's really exciting to be able to not only provide some funding, create a trial scenario, and put some of our current varieties in the ground there, but also got some great press benefits out of it as well for everyone. So as we wrap up today, some key things to think about. Don't fight it. Millennials are here to stay. And while we have that stigma of being narcissistic and so caught up in our phones and not enjoying life and enjoying reality, the truth is we really are. And we have great spending power. We have great brand loyalty. If we fall in love with something, we are loyal and have a focus on the long term. We are, though it's maybe through email and maybe through text, we are focused on relationship and building something sustainable. Meeting us where we are, that marketing piece of it, go where we're already using it. Use social. If you've got, depending on your budget and your region where you are, utilize native content. That's been incredibly beneficial for our brands. It's been something that we've utilized for the last few years and continue to see great provable results. So that's been wonderful. And also text, I mentioned the text program. If that's something that you have the capacity to do, I highly recommend, especially for this market segment, that you capitalize on that, whether it's just to talk about events or talk about volunteer opportunities that are coming up. It's a great way to have direct connection in a relatively unobtrusive way because, again, we're attached to our phones and we're texting all the time. Understanding the context of where millennials came from. We came in saddled with debt in the recession, but also because we have grown up with technology, it's just an evolution of how our society communicates. And it was sort of pushed upon our generation in a way because we are the ones that ended up growing up with it. So as we're developing content, as we're working interpersonally, just remembering that context and being able to approach it, and maybe just, again, that shifted perspective. And using all of these things to create an experience. Give us a reason to participate and engage with you, and then deliver them an experience. This is the most important part, that is worthy of sharing and repeating themselves, because that is where you're going to have long-term sustainability. So at the end of all of this, you have so much control and power. Utilize people within your organization, utilize people in your community, volunteer groups, interns. Make sure you've got millennials at the table. I have been a part of organizations and strategy meetings in our industry where it was just a few weeks ago, not National Garden Bureau, but a few weeks ago, having a conversation with our industry, spent an hour talking about how to talk to and engage millennials, and I was the only millennial in the room. So make sure that we are at the table, make sure that you're engaging us, and create really great content and create really, really great experiences. So with that, I thank you very much for sticking through for the end of the day. I know that it's getting late and you've had a long day of a really great conversation. So thank you for sticking through. If we've got any questions, Katie's going to jump in and relay them, and I will do my very best to get them answered for you. Thank you very much.
We do have some questions coming in, Ryan, but first, thank you so much for such a fantastic, informative session. We really enjoyed it. So the first question that came to us was, what platform do you use for text pushes, and how do you get people to opt in?
That is a really great question, and I will have to find the answer for you. We use our agency has set that program up, so I don't know exactly what company we use, but I will find that out for you. Since we have Canadian customers as well, we do English, Spanish, and French, and people opt in. For all three of our brands, it's the same phone number, and we get people to opt in through, we push it on social, we push it through in-store signage, we push it through newsletters. It's part of some of our advertising campaign. And then when we do in-person events, so when we're at the Chicago Flower Show, when we are speaking at public gardens, it's part of our communication almost every time to get people to sign up. We also have it on every single one of our plant tags. So that way, when people are actually in store and they get it home and they're looking at the tag to figure out how the heck to plant it and keep it alive, that information is right there, so they're able to opt in there. We also have it where they can opt in on our consumer websites. So we try and hit them everywhere. Again, talking about going to where they're utilizing it, we try and communicate that they have that option in every place that they might look.
Okay, and the next question we have for you, Ryan, is what is the biggest difference in how to communicate with millennials when first attracting them versus retaining their interest?
I think attracting them is one thing that I didn't mention thank you so much for this question. One thing that is really important when you're attracting them is show people that look like them in your communications. If I see something where I don't mean this at all in a negative way, but if I see an event that's being promoted and everyone that's there is 60 plus, I might not feel super comfortable or excited about participating. So if and I think that this goes both ways. I think that if you show a yoga session and it's all 20-year-olds, then someone that is in their 50s and 60s might not feel like they're comfortable in participating either. So it's almost creating some separate marketing just to that audience. And then when you're creating your overall content calendar, making sure that you're incorporating people that look like those that you want to engage. So I think that goes for age, and I think that goes for diversity. So almost creating a separate marketing strategy just for a younger or a millennial generation or a technology advanced subset almost, because it doesn't necessarily just mean young. It means people that are more engaged with technology. And then once you get them hooked in, again, I think it's about not just creating an experience that is cute on Instagram. That's nice, but it has to be, you have to deliver. So when you actually get them in the door, again, this is why I say get millennials that are sitting around the table. You have to deliver the actual experience that they want to engage with to get them to come back. And so living up to your brand promise, whatever that is incredibly important to get that retention. And then kind of like retargeting Facebook ads. Once you've got them in, continue to provide things that are unique and different and relatable to that audience, that time of year, and different things that are coming up, and making sure that you stay really relevant.
Great. We had a question come through on branded partnerships. The question is, what ideas or proposals make you most likely to enter into a brand partnership with a botanical garden? And what are you looking for in a branded partnership?
When I work with public gardens, when I work with independent garden centers, we actually do this with our tour where we go and we do these pop-up events or we give talks, whatever it is. I prefer to be really custom. I don't think that a one size fits all works, because it's different for every garden, for every garden center. It has to, whatever partnership we bring or whatever we bring to the table in a partnership has to make sense with what you and your guests are already engaging with. And maybe it is something new. Maybe we're trying a new path to get a more millennial audience or a more pollinator friendly audience, or someone that really is excited about new varieties. So maybe there is some of that new piece to it, but we have to do something that really works for you. And then from our brand perspective, it's about awareness. something that we honestly come up against a lot when we work with public gardens is signage. And we don't ask for gigantic signs saying, this is endless summer, this is first editions, but even labeling of plants, we've come up against that a lot. And I know that especially in more historical gardens, that's a bit of a challenge. But again, when people, the reason that we donate plants or that we partner with public gardens is so that people see them in the landscape, are inspired by their beauty, and are able to replicate that beauty at home. And so that's one of the biggest things that I look for. And then figuring out ways that we can augment the space that exists. So I don't want to just plop a hydrangea in just because I want Bloomstruck shown to the people that are walking through. It all has to make sense. I think that trialing or some data or feedback is really nice to have. I don't think it's a need to have when I'm working with a public garden, but it's a really nice thing to have, especially when we're trialing new varieties. I go back to Des Moines a lot, but they're close, and Kelly is a good friend, but they're doing some cold hardiness trialing for us on a Vitex that's being introduced this year to the commercial or to the consumer industry. So we're not worried about it. It can be in the public space, but we get to try some new things and do what's supposed to be a zone 6-7 plant in zone 5. So that's also really exciting for me when we get to work with public gardens is some of that trialing piece. And it doesn't have to be behind closed doors. It can be out in the public for all to see and just see if it survives the winter, survives the heat, survives humidity. So those are things that I look at for sure.
Okay, and our last question we have for you, Ryan, has us looking a little bit ahead. And it is there a big difference between millennials and the upcoming Gen Z?
Absolutely. I think that, and I think a lot of it stems back just like it is between boomers and X and millennials. It's technology focused. And I think that one of the trends that we're starting to see, and again, I talked about Bloom earlier through Seed Your Future, but even some of the things that we're seeing with Bloom is even more exciting. I mean, millennials are engaged with a greener world for sure, but there's almost a little bit of a backlash to technology. And maybe it's because Gen Z is seeing their parents on their phones the whole time they've been growing up. So not like Fortnite is going away, but I think that there's a little bit of a backlash to technology. And so this back to earth, back to green, I think is a trend that we're going to continue to see. And so finding ways, again, like the kids garden at Magnolia, finding ways to get them not just the backlash to technology, but giving them an outlet for that energy and that attention. That's something that I think is exciting, again, from a visitor perspective, but also from recruiting people to work in our industry and showcasing to this next population of people that are coming up the diversity that our industry offers.
Great. Thank you so much, Ryan, for being with us today. We always love to hear your insight and kind of the crystal ball into seeing what's coming up in the next few years in our industry. So thank you so much for being here today.
Of course, thank you. And again, if anyone has more specific questions or want to talk about plant partnerships, feel free. You can find all my information in the APGA directory too. So feel free to reach out. And thank you again all for sticking through the last part of the day. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan, and thank you to all of our presenters today. We're so glad all of you were able to come and share your expertise, and thank you all for joining us. And we wanted to let you know that you will be receiving a follow-up email within the next 24 hours, and it will have a recording of the webinar along with a short survey. So please take the time to fill out the survey and share your feedback on the day's presentations and send us your ideas for any future events. And we hope to see everyone at the annual conference in Washington, D.C., June 17th through the 21st. It should be really nice to see everyone in person. So take care, everyone. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next year.